Hello and welcome. I'm Edward Norton. Welcome to Norton Investigates. Make no mistake, what we are witnessing tonight is not just another round of missiles over Kyiv. This is not noise. This is not symbolism. This is power politics in its rawest form. There is an iron law in international politics that never bends, no matter how much leaders wish it would. Great powers do not compromise under pressure. They apply it. And as of tonight, Russia has chosen pressure. We open with a city under fire. Kyiv, the political heart of Ukraine, missiles screaming through the night sky, drone swarms probing air defenses, explosions echoing across the capital that was supposed to be preparing for diplomacy, peace talks, negotiations, de-escalation. Instead, the walls are closing in. Here's the paradox, one that sits at the center of this war and defines this moment. You cannot prepare for peace while fighting for leverage. You cannot signal compromise and strength at the same time. And yet, that is precisely what Moscow is attempting to do. Because from a realist perspective, it makes perfect sense. Hours before talks, not days, not weeks, hours. That timing is not accidental. It is the message. This is where many observers get it wrong. They ask moral questions when the system rewards strategic ones. They look for outrage when the real driver is fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of decline, fear of losing leverage at the table. In the world of offensive realism, intentions are secondary. Capabilities and timing are everything. And tonight, Russia is reminding everyone, Ukraine, NATO, Washington, that it still controls escalation. Here's why this moment matters. Historically, wars do not end when talks begin. They end when one side concludes that continuing the fight is worse than the settlement on offer. And what Russia is doing over Kyiv tonight is an attempt to shape that calculation before a single word is spoken across a negotiating table. This is not about punishing civilians. That framing misses the point. This is about signaling resolve, about demonstrating that Russia retains the capacity to raise costs, militarily, psychologically, politically, exactly when restraint is expected. From Moscow's perspective, restraint is weakness, and that brings us to the impossible situation now facing Ukraine and its Western backers. They want diplomacy without concession, de-escalation without disadvantage, stability without acknowledging the balance of power on the ground. But international politics does not allow for that kind of comfort. If you misunderstand what's happening tonight, if you see this as irrational brutality rather than calculated coercion, you will misunderstand where this war is going next. And more importantly, you will misunderstand why peace, if it comes at all, will come on terms shaped not by goodwill but by force. So the question is not why Kyiv is under fire. The real question is this: what does this tell us about the structure of the war and the trajectory of the system itself? To understand why Kyiv came under massive missile and drone attack hours before peace talks, we have to step back and look at the board. Not the headlines, not the press statements, but the underlying structure of the conflict as it exists today. This war has entered its most dangerous phase, not because it is escalating wildly, but because it is hardening. Over the past months, Russia has systematically shifted its campaign. Early hopes of rapid maneuver gave way to attrition. Precision strikes evolved into sustained pressure. And now, as diplomatic channels reopen, Moscow has returned to something far more deliberate: strategic coercion. Satellite reconnaissance shows coordinated launch patterns from multiple vectors, strategic bombers, naval platforms, and ground-based systems. Drone swarms precede missile salvos, forcing Ukrainian air defenses to reveal positions, expend interceptors, and create gaps. This is not indiscriminate fire. This is a probing operation layered on top of a political signal. Meanwhile, Ukraine's position has become structurally constrained. Western aid continues, but unevenly. Ammunition stockpiles remain strained. Air defense coverage is increasingly thin outside critical nodes. Kyiv has to defend everything with less. And then there is the timing. Peace talks don't emerge from optimism. They emerge from exhaustion, from stalemate, from pressure applied behind closed doors. Washington wants talks because escalation risks are rising. Europe wants talks because economic and political fatigue is real. Ukraine wants talks because the battlefield has narrowed its options. Russia understands this perfectly, which is why it chose this moment not to soften its posture, but to harden it. This is where Ukraine, and especially its Western supporters, made a fatal analytical error. They assumed diplomacy would temper escalation. In reality, diplomacy incentivized it. Because in a system defined by uncertainty, the side that fears compromise strikes first. Now, let's apply the offensive realism framework directly. At its core, offensive realism begins with a simple premise. The international system is anarchic. There is no referee. States cannot trust intentions. Survival is the first objective. Power is the currency. And great powers, if given the opportunity, seek regional dominance. Russia's behavior fits this model precisely. From Moscow's perspective, Ukraine is not an independent security problem. It is a geostrategic buffer a forward operating space, a zone that cannot under any circumstances be allowed to fall permanently into a rival alliance structure. That threat did not disappear with time, it intensified. The brutal reality is this: peace talks create risk for Russia, not opportunity, risk. Because talks freeze lines, they invite international guarantees. They open the door to long-term Western entrenchment, so Russia faces a dilemma. Accept negotiations that might lock in disadvantage or reshape the battlefield narrative before talks begin. The missile and drone blitz over Kyiv is the solution to that dilemma. In the calculus of great powers, coercion before compromise is rational. By striking the capital, Russia signals three things simultaneously: capability, resolve, and escalation dominance. Capability: we can reach your political center at will. Resolve: we are not desperate for talks. Dominance: we decide when escalation pauses. This is not about victory tomorrow. This is about leverage today. And here's the detail nobody is talking about. Russia doesn't need Ukraine to concede everything. It only needs Ukraine to concede something irreversible: neutrality, territorial ambiguity, or limits on future alignment. Missiles are not just weapons here. They are bargaining tools. Now pivot to the response. Ukraine's leadership condemns the attacks. Western officials issue familiar statements. Air defenses intercept some strikes. Casualties mount. Infrastructure takes damage. But behind the scenes, something more consequential is happening. Fresh reporting from defense officials confirms what analysts have suspected for months. Ukraine's air defense sustainability is becoming the central vulnerability of the war. Interceptors are expensive. Resupply is slow. Russia knows this. Each drone forces a decision. Each missile drains a stockpile. Each night attack creates psychological fatigue, not just among civilians, but among planners. Meanwhile, diplomatic pressure increases. European capitals grow more vocal about ceasefires. Washington begins to emphasize realistic outcomes. Language shifts. Expectations narrow. This is how wars are shaped, not by battlefield breakthroughs, but by narrative convergence. Here's what keeps officials awake at night. Escalation is now asymmetric. Ukraine escalates upward into NATO risk. Russia escalates downward into Ukrainian vulnerability. One path is politically constrained. The other is structurally permissive. And the trajectory of the next weeks is defined by this imbalance. Russia doesn't need to capture Kyiv. It needs Kyiv to feel exposed. It needs decision makers to internalize insecurity, to negotiate from fear rather than hope. That is offensive realism at work. We are at a binary pivot point. Either negotiations reflect the balance of power as it exists, or the war continues until they do. Zoom out and the implications are stark. This conflict is reshaping the European security architecture. It is reinforcing the lesson that great powers punish proximity, that buffer zones still matter, that moral narratives collapse under structural pressure. If Ukraine accepts a settlement shaped by coercion, it sets a precedent. If it refuses, the war grinds on with increasing cost and decreasing Western patience. The baseline has shifted. The red lines are no longer about territory alone. They are about endurance, about who can sustain pressure longer, materially, politically, psychologically. And this is not unique to Ukraine. Other states are watching. Other regions are recalculating. Because the lesson is clear, in an anarchic system, security comes from power, not promises. Ultimately, what we are witnessing tonight is not chaos. It is structure revealing itself. Missiles over Kyiv are not the failure of diplomacy. They are its precondition. They are the language great powers speak when stakes are existential and trust is absent. The timeless lesson here is uncomfortable but unavoidable. Wars end when power realities are accepted, not when they are wished away. Passive observation is not enough. To understand this world, you must strip away rhetoric and confront incentives, fear, leverage, survival. If you value this kind of deep dive realist analysis that explains not just what happened, but why it had to happen, then stay engaged. Subscribe, turn on notifications, stay informed, stay critical. I'm Edward Norton, and I'll see you in the next investigation.